They yanked him from his car, slammed him with bogus charges until he revealed exactly who he was. Late at night in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, the streets were mostly still, the only sounds coming from the occasional flicker of traffic lights shifting from red to green. Jamal Winslow, a seasoned assistant U.S. attorney, had just wrapped up dinner with colleagues. Work? Injustice? Courtrooms? None of it was on his mind, just getting home. That changed the second he noticed the flashing red and blue lights in his rearview mirror. Sighing, he signaled, pulled over, and reached for his wallet. He wasn't speeding. Hadn't run a light. No reason for a stop. But he knew better than to assume reason had anything to do with this. Two officers approached his window. Officer Kyle Driscoll, tall, broad, military cut, stood at the driver's side. Officer Brent Kessler, leaner, but just as imposing, lingered near the passenger door. License and registration, Driscoll ordered, his tone clipped. Jamal handed over his documents. May I ask why I was stopped? Driscoll exchanged a glance with Kessler before answering. Your tail lights out. Jamal frowned. A blatant lie. His car had just cleared inspection, and the reflection in the rearview mirror showed his brake lights were working just fine. Are you sure about that? He asked, keeping his voice steady. Driscoll's expression shifted, just slightly. Then he leaned in. Sir, step out of the vehicle. A slow tension crept through Jamal's body. He had prosecuted cases like this before, where a so-called routine stop turned into something far worse. His instincts told him to comply. His experience told him these officers were already escalating. I'm not stepping out until you tell me why. Kessler smirked, resting a hand on his belt. Because we said so. Jamal took a breath. He knew the law. Spent years studying, enforcing, defending it. And he knew he wasn't required to exit the car unless there was probable cause. I have the right to ask why I'm being ordered out of my vehicle. Driscoll's patience snapped. He yanked the door open. Step out. Now. Before Jamal could react, Driscoll grabbed his wrist, yanking him forward. The seatbelt jerked against his chest, digging into his shoulder. What the hell are you doing? Jamal barked, instinctively pulling back. Driscoll didn't answer. He just tightened his grip. Within seconds, Kessler was on the other side, wrenching Jamal's arm behind his back. The cold, unforgiving edge of metal cuffs bit into his skin. You're resisting, Driscoll said flatly. Jamal stared in disbelief as Kessler pressed him against the hood of his own car. His heart pounded, but not from fear. From rage. This was a game. A setup. And they thought they had already won. But they were about to learn just how wrong they were. The East Baton Rouge Parish Courthouse was packed. The air thick with routine, clerks shuffling papers, the occasional cough, the quiet murmur of whispered conversations. But beneath it all, tension. Jamal Winslow sat at the defense table, posture rigid but composed. Today, he wasn't here as an attorney. He was here as the defendant. The charges? Resisting arrest. Obstruction. Disorderly conduct. All lies. But Jamal knew the truth didn't matter. Only what could be proven. At the front of the room, Judge Margaret Holloway peered down from the bench. In her mid-60s, she had the kind of presence that commanded authority, whether it was earned or not. Firm. Uncompromising. Dismissive of nonsense. And from the way she barely looked at him, Jamal already knew where this was heading. The prosecutor, Richard Calloway, walked with confidence, the kind that came from knowing the odds were in his favor. Straightening his tie, he nodded toward the officers sitting at the witness stand. Driscoll and Kessler sat smugly, knowing they had the full weight of the system behind them. Your Honor, Calloway began, this is a simple case of an individual escalating a routine traffic stop into a physical altercation with law enforcement. Jamal exhaled slowly. The arrogance. The audacity. Calloway flipped through his notes. The defendant refused to comply with lawful orders, became aggressive, and had to be restrained for the safety of all involved. Jamal's lawyer, Thomas Rivera, overworked, underpaid, shot up from his chair. Objection. There is zero evidence my client was aggressive. Judge Holloway waved a dismissive hand. Overruled. Jamal clenched his jaw. That was fast. Rivera sighed but pushed forward. Your Honor, the officers escalated the situation without just cause. There is no body cam footage showing my client acting aggressively because no such footage exists. Calloway smirked. Body cams were not operational at the time of the arrest. But the officer statements are more than enough evidence. Jamal almost laughed. Their word was all they needed? Convenient. Driscoll took the stand first, delivering his well-rehearsed lines. The defendant was combative from the start, he said smoothly. He refused to exit the vehicle, raised his voice, created a hostile situation.
Lies.
Every word. Kessler followed, nodding along. He tensed up. We feared for our safety. We had no choice but to restrain him. More lies. Jamal's fingers curled into fists under the table. He had spent his career fighting against this kind of blatant corruption. Now he was living it. Judge Holloway barely hid her impatience. Anything else, Mr. Rivera? Rivera hesitated. He knew this judge. Knew her track record. She wasn't interested in fairness. But still, he swallowed hard and pushed forward. Yes, Your Honor. The defense calls Jamal Winslow to the stand. This was it. Jamal rose, walking to the witness stand, feeling every pair of eyes on him. Watching. Judging. Waiting to see if he would break. But he wouldn't. Because what was about to happen would change everything. Jamal took his seat. Exhaled slowly as the clerk swore him in. His hands rested lightly on his lap, but inside, he was simmering. He wasn't here to defend himself. He was here to expose the truth. Calloway stepped forward, pacing slightly, a performance of confidence. Mr. Winslow, would you say you complied with the officer's instructions? Jamal met his gaze.
Calm.
Controlled. I asked why I was being ordered out of my car. That's not illegal. Calloway feigned a sigh. You refused to exit, correct? Jamal held his stare. I asked why I was being asked to step out, which, legally, I have the right to do. Calloway smirked, glancing at the jury as if Jamal's intelligence was an inconvenience. And after multiple orders, you still didn't comply? Because there was no lawful reason to. Calloway turned to the judge, shaking his head. Your Honor, it's clear the defendant. Jamal leaned forward. His voice cut through the room. Before we go any further, I should probably disclose something. Silence. Calloway hesitated. Even Judge Holloway looked up for the first time, actually looking at him. Jamal reached into his briefcase. His lawyer tensed, unsure what was happening. Slowly, Jamal pulled out his badge. A small, simple rectangle, suddenly the most dangerous thing in the room. I'm Jamal Winslow, he said, voice like steel. Assistant U.S. Attorney for the Southern District. The courtroom froze. And in that moment, the entire case imploded.